Welcome to this explainer. Let's get right into it, because we're looking at a pretty massive question today. Have you ever wondered why traditional peace treaties just fall apart so often? Like why drawing a new line on a map or having politicians sign a document rarely actually stops a war on the ground? Well, today we're exploring that exact mystery. We're going to look at why traditional diplomacy often fails, mostly because it completely overlooks the hidden cultural realities that are actually driving the violence in the first place. Basically, we're taking conflict out of the realm of political math, and we're looking at it through the anthropological lens.
Okay, let's dive into this with a really profound observation from Kevin Averick that perfectly sets the stage for us. He says, culture is the lens through which the causes of conflict are refracted, and that right there completely shifts our perspective. As you'll see throughout this explainer, conflicts aren't just about borders or economics. Underneath all of that, they are fundamentally about colliding cultural worldviews. If we ignore the culture part, we're essentially trying to solve a giant complex puzzle in the dark.
So, here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the hidden cultural lens. 2. Enemy images and warfare. 3. Mimesis versus Manichaeism. 4. Ethnographic peace research. And finally, concrete anthropological methods.
All right, section 1, the hidden cultural lens.
To really understand deeply rooted, intractable conflicts, we first have to fundamentally change our tools of observation. Think about traditional diplomacy. It usually views conflict from, 10,000 feet up. It focuses on state-sponsored political aims, borders, and who gets what resources. But the anthropological lens? That zooms right down to the ground level. It recognizes that to the people actually doing the fighting, the conflict is usually about maintaining their specific social reality. Anthropology looks at local identities, historical rituals, and deeply rooted shared meanings. The stuff that actually sustains the fighting, long after the political leaders have packed up and left the negotiating table.
Moving to section 2, enemy, images, and warfare.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how understanding those shared meanings actually explains the violence itself. Let's look at this timeline of the Nuer and Dinka conflict in Sudan. Before the 1990s, they fought with spears, right? But that violence was heavily constrained by strict spiritual taboos. If a warrior killed an enemy, the victim's spirit was believed to stay with the killer until a highly specific cleansing ritual was performed. But then, in the 1990s, guns were introduced. Rebel commanders started arguing that killing from a distance with a gun didn't carry the same spiritual risks. And as those indigenous ethics and purification rituals just eroded away, it literally poured gasoline on the conflict. Elders from these communities neutrally describe this new, completely unconstrained era of violence as the reign of the educated. They lament that this new generation of combatants fights completely devoid of the old social rules, rules that historically existed to protect women and children. It shows us a pretty terrifying reality. When the cultural norms that surround and limit a conflict break down, the violence just escalates exponentially.
Which brings us to section 3. Mimesis versus Manichaeism.
To examine the exact psychological and cultural mechanics that manufacture hatred, especially in asymmetric warfare, we can turn to anthropologist Antonius Robbins' research on the Iraq War from 2000 to 2006. But a quick aside. Before analyzing any conflict, a researcher stepping into a war zone has to navigate something Robin calls ethnographic seduction. This is when informants, whether they mean to or not, basically tempt field workers to accept their specific political narrative as the absolute objective reality. Overcoming the seduction is absolutely crucial. If anthropologists don't stay impartial, they can never achieve the balanced analysis required to actually understand what's happening.
Once a researcher is impartial, things become clear. Robin identified two main cultural models fueling the violence in Iraq. The first one is mimesis. This is a fascinating process where intense rivalries make enemies actually interpret and subtly copy each other's operations. For example, U.S. military strategists shifted away from those massive shock and awe campaigns and started deploying small, highly mobile units. Without even realizing it, they were directly mimicking the tactics of the Iraqi insurgents, steering both sides toward a growing tactical similitude on the battlefield.
The second model is Manichaeism. This is a deeply ingrained cultural model used to structure the world into mutually exclusive categories of absolute good and absolute evil. When combatants adopt this binary worldview, there is no gray area. It radically enhances the dehumanization of the enemy. The other is no longer viewed as a human being with valid grievances. They're seen as a pure manifestation of evil that just has to be eradicated.
So the crucial point here is how these two models actually interlock to sustain a war. Mimesis drives the physical and tactical imitation on the battlefield, creating a deadly mirror image of combat. Meanwhile, Manichaeism drives the psychological entrenchment of good versus evil in the mind. In Iraq, these operated together to create this massive violence-trauma-violence cycle, locking combatants into a spiral of death that conventional politics just couldn't break. Okay, let's pivot to Section 4, Ethnographic Peace Research.
If those are the underlying mechanics of violence, what on earth is the antidote? Well, it's the anthropological mediator. These folks are far more than just language interpreters. They act as worldview translators. They step right into an act of conflict and identify the local social structures that already exist. By operating as a cultural bridge, they help opposing sides reframe their social reality. They mitigate cultural violence not by, debating high-level politics, but by helping parties actually understand the deeply held symbols and meanings of the other side.
A truly beautiful example of this comes from the work of anthropologist Laura Nader. In northern Lebanon, there was a severe dispute spreading across a line of Sunni and Shia villages. The government tried state-sponsored military scare tactics, literally dropping bombs nearby, which, as you might guess, failed completely to resolve the tension. Instead, a respected local peacemaker invited the feuding men to a banquet to share bread and salt. By tapping into this highly specific, culturally resonant ritual of hospitality, peace was achieved where state military might totally failed.
And finally, Section 5, Concrete Anthropological Methods.
Let's move to how this builds into real, actionable, boots-on-the-ground operational procedures. Enter Jean-Pierre Olivier Desardins' contractual model. This is a highly systematic action research process. Step 1, deploy anthropo experts, people who deeply understand the local culture. Step 2, conduct mixed research, meaning you directly link social science with practical technology and engineering. And Step 3, combine surveys using what's called the ECIRS method to rapidly identify local conflicts and strategic groups. Basically, this model allows researchers and humanitarian operators to collaborate seamlessly on the ground without stepping on each other's toes.
And this brilliantly illustrates the real-world impact. Because of these concrete methods, anthropologists successfully modified international Ebola protocols to respect Kisi burial rituals in Guinea, which safely curbed the disease while still honoring local traditions. In Northern Ireland, they helped communities redesign loyalist murals to actually soften aggressive sectarian boundaries. And in Niger, they linked engineering with local knowledge to build culturally adapted traditional water wells. Time and again, when we use this lens, anthropology delivers concrete, life-saving, and peace-building results.
I want to leave you with this provocative thought as we wrap up. If we stop treating conflicts as purely political or mathematical problems of borders and resources, what hidden solutions might we finally see? The cultural lens is always there, just waiting to be used. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope you walk away looking at the world and the conflicts within it with a whole new perspective. Catch you next time.